Ward 2 representative to the DC City Council. But before I tell you about Brooke, I wanted just to point out one thing, and that was that today's Zoom program, which as Lynn says is called Cocktails, Conversation, and COVID, is a joint presentation. Is a joint presentation of the village.
I'm sorry, Tony. Can I ask, Tony, you just muted yourself, and I'm going to ask that everybody mute themselves. I'll go through and mute you as I can. Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Shall I start over again?
I think that might be a good idea. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
That.
Thank you, Lynn. I am pleased to introduce Brooke Pinto, our newly elected.
Tony, you just remuted yourself. I don't think I did that. I think you did that. Let's see, can we? Okay, give us a second, folks. This is a community program and we're all working together. There you go, Tony, I think you're now off mute.
Okay.
Can I interject? Am I on mute?
Now you're okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, who is this?
This is Jessica. I just
Oh,
want to tell you, I'm well. I'm going to have to leave early, so this isn't going to be rudeness. It's just that I've got to leave early.
Tony is still muted. Tony is still muted. She's under Jonathan. She's under her husband's name.
Thank you. Let's see if I can't unmute. There you go. I'm going to ask her to unmute.
I'm not touching anything.
Okay, you're unmuted now.
Okay, it says I'm unmuted. Am I truly unmuted?
Yes.
All right. I am really pleased to introduce Brooke to the Georgetown Village and to the Hillendale people who are with us tonight. Brooke, as you know, is our new council representative from Ward 2. But before I tell you about Brooke, I wanted to point out one thing, and that is that today's Zoom program, which we call Cocktails, Conversation, and COVID, is a joint presentation in a way of the village and the Hillendale Condo Association, because their current president, Gail Nordheimer, is also a super active village board member and former president of the village. So that's why I just wanted to point that out. And of course, you and Hillendale, as are the rest of us, we are all constituents of Brooke's. Now, Brooke grew up in Connecticut. She then went on to Cornell to get her undergraduate degree in hospitality and business. And hospitality tells you that she is an extrovert. There's no question about that. And that has done her very well. Either during college or after college, she had a job in a senior living community, and it was there that she realized there were a lot of legal issues that had to do with helping seniors, and she decided that she really needed a law degree. So she chose Georgetown Law School, came to Georgetown, and in 2014 either started or finished her degree in law. But when you go to Georgetown Law School, you also do a lot of extracurricular work, one of which was working with, for her, she worked on landlord and tenant issues at the legal clinic for the homeless, which I know well because I did some work with issues in DC. But as Brooke explained to me one time in one of our conversations over the phone, she also wanted to get involved in more broad DC policymaking. And so she applied for and was given a job as Assistant Attorney General. It sounds like a really big position, Assistant Attorney General in the Attorney General's office of the District of Columbia. And she did that for a couple of years. And then in 2000, I would say 2019, 2020, when it was obvious that the Ward 2 council seat was going to be vacated for the first time in God knows how many years, she decided to go for it and to run for that position. And fortunately, she had the endorsement of her boss, the Honorable Carl Russin, the Attorney General of the District of Columbia. So she launched her campaign and perhaps somewhat miraculously won. But everyone I think is wondered at first how she managed to defeat six candidates, some of whom were really quite well known, most of whom seemed to be male, for this position. But I could tell, because I was a recipient of many conversations, that she had probably made a zillion, or her team, a zillion phone calls. And there was an extremely active campaign for someone who had never run for elected office before. She contacted me personally several times and helped me solve a problem with an absentee ballot. So that allowed me to vote for her, and among other things. So she won the Democratic primary for that position by about 700 votes. And then after that, the special election in order to allow her to fill the position right away so she could start working and not wait for November or January. So here she is, and I introduce to you now, Brooke Pinto. Brooke?
Well, thank you so much for that introduction, Tony. It's very nice to see you over video conference and not just on the phone. But it was a pleasure to get to know you through the spring over the phone and through those conversations. And, you know, to your comment of how did she win in this crowded field, I think that, you know, is really all that we were focused on in the spring when our campaign had to go remote after about 2 weeks since we announced due to COVID. And so we just called all of our residents, and it was a really good opportunity, not just for me to introduce myself to folks who I didn't have a chance to know before and explain my kind of vision, but more importantly, to hear directly from thousands of residents about issues that were important to each of our neighbors. And I think that is something, the experience through the campaign continues to inform us and guide us every day, because not everybody is coming to the Wilson building or testifying at hearings to make their voices known. Sometimes you need to call people and hear directly about what their challenges are. And you know, mentioned my hospitality background. I think that's what this job really is all about. To me, it's really about customer service. So I think the hospitality training is particularly relevant here. So I thought I could give a little bit of my background. Tony shared some of my kind of educational background, and then I could share some of my primary priorities for this seat, but then most importantly, want to hear from you if folks have specific questions or ideas or suggestions so that this can be really a conversation. I'm saddened that this is not an in-person cocktail event, but it is the best that we can do during this public health crisis. And thank you to Lynn as well for organizing my visiting with you all this evening. It's great to be here. So as Tony mentioned, I had a background in hospitality and business, and I've worked at a couple senior living communities, but one of which was in New York at a center called Brookdale Senior Living Community. And part of my responsibility set was helping the residents and their families identify which healthcare options make the most sense, going through the contracts for their residency and ensuring that their family was set up. And I was so frustrated by how ineffective I was at advising them for all the different healthcare options, because I wasn't a healthcare expert. I didn't have the legal background. And so I decided I really needed a law degree to be able to provide the type of service to these residents that I wanted to. And so that's when I pursued a law degree at Georgetown. And prior to the other activities that Tony mentioned with the Landlord Tenant Resource Center and the Washington Legal Clinic for the Homeless, I worked at Senator Richard Blumenthal's office. He is one of the senators from Connecticut, which is the state I grew up in. I was his health and aging fellow. And I worked with him on many issues ranging from blocking telemarketer spam calls to ensuring more access to hearing aids and healthcare and familial financial abuse. And I really enjoyed working on all of those issues, but it was so broad and felt so bird's eye view in many instances because the numbers were so great when you're dealing with federal legislation. We talk in the millions of how many people it was affecting. And I realized that it was much more important to me to be able to look people in the eye and figure out what their challenge was and help them as an individual address it, as opposed to national policy and legislation. And so after law school, I knew that I wanted to work directly on behalf of district residents. And so after a clerkship, I went to the DC Office of the Attorney General. First, I was there as a tax attorney representing the DC Office of Tax and Revenue. And then most recently, I was the Assistant Attorney General for Policy and Legislative Affairs. And so in that role, I was working with the DC Council on a daily basis on bills that they were working on to ensure that the bill was actually tackling what it set out to, that it was well drafted, that it was enforceable and implementable, but also on bills that were originating out of our office around consumer protection and small business enforcement and tenants' rights. And I really enjoyed being a real partner in solving the challenges that our community faces. And so, as Tony mentioned, in January, when the former council member resigned from the seat and then a week later announced he was going to be running again, I decided that I was going to run for the seat as well. So I left my job and a week later jumped in the race. And then, as I noted, 2 weeks later, COVID-19 materialized. And so our entire operation went remote, and the few team members we had went remote. Our volunteers went remote. And so we just called everybody that we could. And so that it was a busy, great campaign. And I'm really particularly grateful for the special election, which allowed me to start right away so I could participate and represent Ward 2 in the budget deliberations for this year, which I'm happy to get into in a moment. And if anyone has questions about the budget, would be happy to address those. And so that's kind of how I ended up here. When I think about some of my priorities, something that we're very focused on is our small businesses and ensuring that our small businesses have what they need to thrive and get back on their feet. We know that it's incredibly important to the livelihoods of the owners of the small businesses, to the workers they employ, and also to the residents who live in our neighborhoods, because they really make the neighborhood feel that we all know and love so much. And so this comes through a couple of different options. There's the legislative pieces, which was additional grant money. We were proud to support a $100 million grant that the mayor's office will be administering to give more support and direct relief to our small businesses. But there are also a bunch of regulatory challenges that our small businesses face that were a bit easier to rectify right away, because not all of them have to deal with new funding sources. So one example is the streeteries and allowing our restaurants to utilize the sidewalk space and into the street, particularly now when people are driving less, to earn some additional revenue by using this space in the street that many of you may have seen, that we call streeteries. We heard from some of our small businesses and restaurants that they were having challenges with insurance, that they had to purchase an additional $1 million insurance policy just to serve their products on the sidewalks. And so we worked with the Office of Risk Management to waive that requirement so that if a business has general liability insurance up to 2018, that would suffice for them to provide service on the sidewalk. We heard from other small businesses that they were being required to pay penalty and interest through the Office of Tax and Revenue because they had inadvertently failed to pay their sales tax on time. Many of them thought that all of their taxes were deferred until July 15th, but only some of them were. And so we worked with the Chief Financial Officer and the Office of Tax and Revenue to waive those interest and penalty payments for our small businesses. And so we are always looking to partner with the ANCs and the BIDs and the Department of Transportation and then Georgetown Village and other neighborhood groups about in order to identify the challenges people are facing and to creatively think through solutions, many of which are remediable without additional funding always. So we're always looking at those kind of two buckets. Another one of our primary priorities is around criminal justice reform. And when we think about criminal justice reform, we really think of the whole spectrum of the human being, from providing more after-school education opportunities to our youth. We know that crime increases between the ages of 13 and 17 when students are left unsupervised, many times because their parents are at work. And so partnering with our schools and with our nonprofits to have more accessibility to after-school programs is really important to us, so that we can ensure that kids are channeling their energy into creative and productive means and not going into crime. And it's just very important for the whole development of the student, all the way to ensuring that our returning citizens, many of whom have served their sentences outside the district, as you know, because of our unique makeup and our lack of local control of our jails, to ensure that we are providing meaningful housing opportunities and job opportunities for them. Our next kind of key priority is around affordable housing. And we think of this in a couple different buckets. There's the need to ensure that our current housing and our current residents are able to stay, live here, and age in place. And so we're looking at a lot of means we can do this through the tax code, the homestead deduction, building a 50% reduction in residential real property taxes has not been adjusted up to address for cost of living increases or inflation in years. And so we are looking to increase the homestead deduction at least to match up with the increases that have taken place, but I would like to see it much higher than 50%, and ensure that we can provide meaningful in-home care that is way too expensive for most families and most seniors aging in place. And that goes back to what I saw at my senior living communities that I've worked in, of the challenges that our families are facing with needing at-home care, and many of whom not having the resources to provide it. It also includes addressing our chronically homeless population. In Ward 2, we have the highest rate of individuals experiencing homelessness. We've had a real rise in encampments, particularly during COVID-19, and we are working to move as many folks into housing as we can. We were proud to support an additional $5 million of permanent supportive housing vouchers in the budget. Supported a $50 million increase in public housing repairs this year, as well as an increase in the Housing Production Trust Fund to $188 million. And so we are, again, thinking about all the different avenues we can use to provide housing and to provide the supports to the families who need it most. I want to spend a few minutes talking about the budget, because there are a number of things that happened this year's budget. Of course, the Chief Financial Officer came out with his revenue projections, which expected $1.25 billion loss. And so we were coming at amending the 2020 budget as well as the 2021 budget to ensure that our essential programs were maintained without raising taxes, was our kind of one of our guiding principles. And so we wanted to make sure we balanced the budget in a way that cared for our residents in the most need. And so we fought for some of those funding measures that I just talked about, with housing, for increase in Housing Production Trust Fund, for an increase in public housing repairs, for more funding for a permanent supportive housing voucher. And we also fought for Ward 2 specific projects. So we were able to get additional $500,000 for the canal project. We were able to get $7 million for Jella Field renovation. And this, importantly, we knew that funding was going to be insufficient, because if the project is really going to take $25 million, the $7 million of funding is not going to get us what we need with Jella Recreation Center. And so we included a feasibility study that DGS and DPR are going to be responsible for to issue by December 2020 to clarify how much the project is going to cost, when the request for proposals is going to be put out, and the timeline for the renovation, so that we can all have a little bit more clarity an assurance that this project will be completed and will be a priority. And then we will work to get the remainder of the funding in next year's budget. Some of you may have heard about the advertising tax that was proposed. This was a 3% tax on advertisements in the budget. And I really worried that it was going to have a detrimental effect on our small businesses and our news organizations, many of which are already struggling to get by. However, the way that it was proposed was that it was embedded into the budget. And so it was expected to yield $18 million of expected revenue, but all of those revenues earned were tied into the budget. And so we worked very hard with our colleagues and the chairman in the budget office to remove the tax without touching the essential programs that expected revenue was aimed to touch. And so I was very proud that we were able to remove that for the benefit of our small businesses and our news organizations while sustaining our essential social services programs. So those are some of the highlights of the budget. A long-winded way of saying kind of how I got here and some of our main priorities going forward. We didn't get everything that we wanted in the budget. We still have a real need for more senior centers in Ward 2 and more senior civic spaces. We know that people do the best when we have intellectual stimulation and socialization and physical movement, and having more physical civic spaces to do so is incredibly important to me and important to our office, and we will continue fighting for additional funding and space to do that. And we look forward to hearing from you, and I'll pause myself there so I don't go on for too long. As Tony mentioned, I'm an extrovert, so I don't want to speak for too long without having opportunity to answer your questions and hear from you. But thank you again, Lynn and Tony and everyone for having me tonight.
Thank you very much. And so what I'd like to do is, if you have a question, you are welcome to either put it in the chat box or kind of indicate, raise your hand, something. You can unmute yourselves, although I was a little heavy-handed in muting you all. You can unmute all yourselves. It's an opportunity. I know many of you haven't had the opportunity to meet Brooke before this. And I know that you care very deeply about where you live and your community. And so I welcome your questions. I think we have our first one from Henry Lamont. Henry, I saw your hand up. Thank you. You need to unmute yourself.
Yes,
you
can
go.
you hear me?
We can now.
Okay, my question concerns crime. I keep getting things from the police department and the DMV about a rash of stolen cars and burglary, and that we're having a real crime wave in this area. And I just wondered what, people are going to do about that.
Oh, so we're starting with the easy ones. Okay, Brooke.
No, it's okay. I mean, I think it's a huge problem and we're very concerned about it. I am in contact with Commander Bedlian, who covers your area essentially daily, to figure out what is going on and to get to the bottom of why there is this increase. One thing that we found was at Water Street, which we're looking to close off now, I should share, because we found that a lot of folks are coming in from Maryland and parking their cars and are engaging in illegal activity around cannabis and selling cannabis, smoking cannabis, putting off fireworks, and have engaged in other crimes in the area. And so we are particularly concerned when we see that happening with out-of-state license plates, because we need to be protecting district residents first and foremost. And so something that we're working with Department of Transportation on and the Metropolitan Police Department right now is to close off Water Street and to increase enforcement around the area so that people aren't parking their cars there overnight, which we have found leads to an increase in crime. We're also putting more CCTV cameras up in the area to be able to monitor these trends and identify what is going on and identify the suspects. Something else I'll say, and kind of goes to what I was talking about earlier with criminal justice reform and providing more after-school education opportunities. We know that when crime occurs, it is just the tip of the iceberg of what is going on behind the scenes in that person's life and family. And so that's why I'm a real believer that over the longer term, we have to invest in our families and we have to invest in our after school programming and restorative justice efforts so that we see a longer term reduction in this type of crime while we are also addressing our immediate needs to keep our residents safe today and tomorrow. And so those are some of the efforts that we're working on right now, but we'll certainly keep you all informed if there are other concerns or updates or more cameras. The other thing that is really helpful when you all see unusual situations or you experienced a crime or have a concern, if you make the complaint through the police department, that enables and empowers them to track these things more closely and to provide additional enforcement and additional officers. So the more we have on record about this happening, the better equipped they are to respond.
Thank you, Brooke. That's really important that
Thank
it be reported. Gail, I think I saw your hand next.
Yes, and I thank you for those comments on the crime prevention and things we can do about it. First, I want to thank Carol Kelly and Emily Summers, who are co-chairs for the program committee for both the village and for Hillendale, and have put us all together and made today possible. So thank you, Brooke, for being with us and for their organizational skills. It's terrific. I have a somewhat provincial question. Last winter, there was quite a lot to do about the Ellington field being transferred from the school and Department of Public Schools to Parks and Recreation. And we were promised that nothing would be done to change the status of the field until we had a council member. So I'm just wondering if you can give us an update or if anything is happening, or with COVID, maybe it's still put off. But the neighbors care very much about the field and track and hope to avoid having nighttime lights and traffic and constant games. We hope to be able to continue to use that field.
Certainly. And first of all, that question is not provincial. Nothing is too provincial, but the use of Ellington Field is incredibly important. And it is one of the first things that we inquired about once we took office. And so the update on Ellington is that we will have an update at the end of September. DPR is issuing their update to us at that time. It is our understanding that they intend to maintain control of the field, but as we're looking for additional options for students to use, you know, as the Jelliff Field is being considered, and there's going to be a new school at Georgetown Day School in Ward 3, all of the field space is currently kind of on the table and being considered for how students and how the community can use it. Another thing that with Ellington that we're making sure is really prioritized is cleaning up of the divots and making sure that it is walkable and people aren't tripping. I know there's been a series of accidents that have happened where people have hurt their ankles, and it's just not as beautiful to look at when it's not redone. And so we're working with DPR to ensure that it is redone appropriately and that the authority remains with DPR to ensure our community has access. So unfortunately, I don't have many more details now until September, but we've followed up with them a number of times and they continue to assure us that at the end of September, they will give us their update of the current plan, at which time there will be opportunity for community input before anything moves forward or anything changes. And
Right.
That is very important to us and we know is important to you all.
Thank you. Thanks, that's important. Are there other questions?
No?
Lynn?
Lynn, I have a question. Barbara Downs, I'm trying to get, there I am.
There you are.
I have a question for Brooke. As a community member, the relationships we've had with your office have been with the staff at Jack Evans, and I'm just wondering how many of those people are going to be kept on, and do you have a new roster of staff members in place, or how is that working for you right now?
It's a great question. So we have a great team in place. We are almost entirely staffed up. I will say our team is incredibly smart and hardworking, but most importantly, they're all really service oriented. And so I hope that you have the opportunity to get to know many of our team members. The Director of Constituent Services who worked for Councilmember Evans' office, Sherry Kimball, is still on our team. She's currently the Director of Constituent Services. And so if you have additional questions in the interim, please feel free to reach out to her. We are looking to hire one more Constituent Services coordinator. That position is posted now, and we're still accepting applications, but the rest of our team is built out, and everybody's name, position, email address, and phone number is all on the council website under our office. So if you have a specific issue, you can always reach out to the person who's kind of assigned to that area. But when in doubt, always feel free to reach out to me directly or my chief of staff, who's Genevieve Hewlick, and we will make sure that your inquiry gets to the right place.
So who's going to be attending community meetings, such as they're going to be in the near future?
So we all are. We all attend community meetings every night, and kind of just depends on the area and where we're covering. So we will likely have somebody specifically assigned to Georgetown, and that person will be your point of contact. It may be Sherry, it may be someone else. We're still working out those details until we have hired our final person. So that's what I'd say for now. You should feel free to reach out to Sherry or me or my chief of staff, and we'll make sure that the question gets directed appropriately, but you will have somebody assigned to your neighborhood.
Great.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Carol Kelly, I believe I saw your hand up.
Yes, thank you very much. Brooke, Carol Kelly here. I live in Hillendale and work with the Georgetown Village Board. Very heartened to hear your comments generally, and certainly your comments about senior citizens in your district area. As you know, Georgetown Village is a unique entity, certainly a small one, but we consider ourselves punching above our weight, as people like to say, trying to provide senior citizen services. So with your background and the comments that you made about uniquely understanding seniors' issues, and we do receive some support from the district, for which we thank you and thank the district. Question, how can we most effectively work with you, and what are your thoughts on, especially during this pandemic and then beyond, as we hopefully move in as soon as possible to a transition to a more normal life, whatever that means. But how can we most effectively work with you on senior citizen issues in the area to make sure that seniors are taken care of?
It's a really important question, and something that I hope that we are in constant contact and engagement on to figure this out together, how we can partner most effectively together. Something that I continue to find is how much misinformation is out there around cost of healthcare, around preferences for aging in place and staying in one's home versus going to senior living communities. I think that's something that is really important for all of us to work on culturally is, and I've charged my generation to do this in large part as well, is moving away from language of nursing home. I think you all may agree that senior centers are wonderful places, and all these things we talked about intellectual stimulation and socialization and physical movement, and a place to really socialize and experience life together is really important for our health, our physical and our mental health. And I think that we need kind of culturally a reduction in stigma around that for our seniors who are less enthusiastic about moving to a senior living community or about participating in a senior center. I speak to many seniors who are not interested in being involved because their perception of what a nursing home used to be. And I think that that's something that we can all partner together on, and to exposing the rest of our senior community in Ward 2 about what a really vibrant senior community looks like and should be. and should be the kind of guiding light. I think that we need to continue fighting for more funding. A lot of this is done with dollars, sadly enough, and we need to ensure that we are working with my colleagues and with the mayor's office to make the case that it is not sustainable for most families to age in place given the cost of healthcare. And we need more funding to directly incentivize qualified people to go into in-home nursing and health aid work. And we need to incentivize more people to age in place through our tax code, through our homestead deductions that I talked about. And so those are some of the things that I will fight for, but I always am, and that I could, use your support on, but would always benefit from new ideas around ways that you all think are more needed and that you need more funding around or more support on from our office. So I hope that this is a continuing dialogue both ways on that front.
Thank you, Brooke. And I will just, I don't think it's public knowledge, but I will state that Brooke has very kindly agreed to meet with myself and the executive director of Foggy Bottom and the executive director of DuPont Circle. So we will be meeting with Brooke to talk about villages and see how we can work together with her. I believe the meeting is now scheduled for next Thursday. So I thank you for the time and I thank you for being here today as well. We do have more questions for you. I have a Bert Dillon, who's a community member that's on our call today. And Bert, you have a question.
Yeah, I'd like to hear a little bit more about what's being done for the homeless. I don't mean longer term solutions, but in the immediate situation with COVID, what is being done, what needs to be done and isn't, how can we be useful in terms of either public pressure or donations or volunteering, what's being done and what needs to be done?
Thank you. Great question.
So what needs to be done is that we need to move people into housing immediately. It is a huge public health risk to be on the street. There's a heightened risk of exposure, and it's always been a huge challenge, but particularly with COVID, it's really immediate and imperative. I will say one challenge that we find that is particularly upsetting, and we could certainly use some support on from the community, is that the rise in encampments has occurred at really rapid speeds. People living in tents, particularly after the encampments were cleared in Noma. Many of the tents moved to DuPont Circle and Foggy Bottom, Georgetown in particular. And there is really a bifurcation in the sense of the community that we find, of people saying we need to do everything we can for these people and it's not safe that they're living here, and people who say, why is there a tent outside of my home and it is very frustrating to walk by and it is unsafe. And I think what both of those cohorts can agree on is that we need to move people into housing. And so we are working also on a daily basis with the Department of Housing and the Interagency Council on the Homeless, as well as the Washington Legal Clinic for the Homeless and Miriam's Kitchen on outreach efforts. And so they've already been really successful in identifying many of the individuals who are on the street and moving them into housing, either through hotel vouchers, or some of them have received permanent supportive housing vouchers, which is in large part why I supported increased funding and will continue to support increased funding for permanent supportive housing vouchers, because we know those vouchers are the most successful in getting people moved into housing and having them stay there. A lot of the rapid rehousing programs, frankly, have not been as successful as they aim to be, because it's a 12-month program without sufficient wraparound services. And then 12 months later, these people many times are back on the street because they haven't learned how to take their medication or how to budget or how to get their child to school. And so we really need to increase our wraparound services with our permanent supportive housing vouchers. I think right now, ways in which that you can support are that for this first piece I'm talking about with community stress around who means what and whose preferences are what. we really need to come together as a community to identify this is a true crisis. We have a housing crisis in our city. Ward 2 has the #1 rate of individuals experiencing homelessness in any time. And with the pandemic, we've seen a rise in these encampments, which are not good for public safety for the constituents living in the tents and the constituents living in traditional homes. And so I think that there's a cultural component here that we all need to be really direct in talking about and talking to our neighbors about what the challenge is and get really on the same page. Some of you may have heard there was an encampment clearing that occurred, but theft really, that some individuals in DuPont Circle in the middle of the night threw away many of the tents that were on DuPont Circle, including all of the medication of the individuals living there, all of the paperwork.
I mean, the government or people?
No, just individuals. The government had nothing to do with it.
Really? I didn't know. No, I didn't know.
Yep, it was a week and a half ago. And it is it's really scary that as a community, we got to a place where people were so frustrated with the encampments that they destroyed and stole all of these people's lively possessions. So for that instance, we are, looking at the camera footage and trying to get to the bottom of what happened there. But I do think it represents a larger community challenge that we all need to grapple with, which is we have a crisis. And if we all are committed to doing something about it, it's going to require moving people into housing through permanent supportive housing vouchers. And so to the extent that you can advocate for that with my other colleagues, with the mayor's office, I'd say that's the #1 most important thing.
You need more money for that. You have more money willing to move in. We just need more money.
We need more money for that. I mean, the other thing that I don't know how you all can really engage in this work, but that we're working on is the coordination between the data. So we have a lot of nonprofits and a lot of agencies who have outreach workers who go out into the street and meet these people and say, okay, would you want to move into housing? What are your challenges? Do you have a spouse? Do you have a pet? How can we move you into housing? And a lot of work is very effective through that outreach model, because then we can get to know these individuals as a city and track their success and ensure that they're getting on the right track. But not all of the organizations are always talking to one another. And so we may have outreach workers who are very familiar with one couple in one neighborhood, and they've never seen the government worker who comes a month later, and it leads to distrust and it leads to just kind of ineffective management of the process. And so that's something that we are very focused on, is increasing the collaboration and data sharing among the agencies so we can all be on the same page as we move people into housing. If you're looking to privately donate, I will say there are a lot of fantastic nonprofit organizations in the city who are doing a lot of this really important outreach work directly for our DC residents.
We have Miriam's Kitchen near where I live, and I think they're pretty good. Yeah.
They're great. They're really a good organization.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Friendship places too.
Are there any other questions for Brooke? Ann Satterthwaite.
I was interested in your comments about Water Street. I've been chairman of the Georgetown Waterfront Park, and that is obviously adjacent to Water Street. And then we have a very vibrant residential community down there. And one of the problems I've seen over the years is that the park police deal with the park and the DC police deal with the street. There needs to be much greater coordination between those two police departments. I think that would very much, both systems I know are shorthanded, but I think there are problems there. And I think when they have these studies, they need to have a broader base of participants in the study down on Water Street, because there's a whole rowing community that's, needs to be involved and needs access in any case. So I think there are serious problems there, and they are very much affecting the residential neighbors when they have drag races at night and fireworks going off. I mean, it's sort of out of hand. And I think there needs to be a very careful coordination of public and private groups to try to see how that can be ameliorated.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for saying that. We've, done crime walks of the area with MPD and with ANC 2E. Lisa Palmer, who represents the area, has been a real leader for that area and trying to get to the bottom of this. And that's why we're trying to close this off at least during the evening hours from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. when the crime really increases around the fireworks and the drugs. But we are looking to longer term solutions, perhaps permanently closing off the street or adding speed bumps and other mechanisms to reduce the crime. And so we would love your input and participation if you'd like to be a part of those discussions so that we can make sure we get this right. We're trying to do the immediate need of the reduction of crime for the overnight parking and then make sure we have a longer term solution. So if that's something that you would like to be interested in, I'd love to follow up with you about that.
We have a DC water problem too, with a massive sewer project with the ventilation shafts in the park. So there are a lot of issues down there.
Lynn, could I ask you to put us in touch, or Anne, would you like my email address? What's the easiest way to coordinate?
I can get that, so don't worry. My name is.
I'll be happy to share it.
Okay, thank you, Lynn. Thanks, Anne.
No problem. Thank you. I believe there are a few more questions. I thought I saw a few more hands. Betsy, did you want to ask a question? You keep raising your hand and then I lower it and you raise it again. Is that something you'd like to ask? Wait, there you go.
Am I unmuted?
You are now unmuted. Yes, there you go.
It's about the first time I've ever been unmuted. First of all, I'd like to congratulate you, Brooke, on this huge win. And you are clearly a very impressive young lady, and we are very fortunate to have you as our representative. I have one question that is sort of an oddball question. I have no idea what the answer is. And then I have a practical question. Maybe I should ask the practical one first. And that is, what can we do to get the mail delivered in an appropriate fashion? I know that our current president would like that not to happen, and it has definitely been slowed up. And our mail carriers have reported that they've been told to slow it up. And that doesn't help if anybody wants to do a mail-in ballot, which I believe are perfectly safe once they get there and once we receive them. Is there anything you feel we can do?
Yes, so we just passed a new law last week, which requires the Board of Elections to send every single registered voter in the District of Columbia a mail-in ballot. And one of the main goals for that is to not only increase enfranchisement and ensure everybody votes, but also to increase faith in the system so people aren't waiting for their application form to come in and then returning that and making sure they have enough time to get their ballot back. Everybody will receive the ballot. In the next few weeks, the Board of Elections is going to send every registered voter a postcard, essentially. And the aim of this is to ensure that everybody's voter registration status is up to date. So if you've moved, for example, and don't receive one of these postcards, you may need to re-register with your new address. If you had a name change and don't receive a postcard, you may need to register with a new address. And so that is just to ensure that all of the names in the system are up to date and to give people another opportunity to register to vote if they are not registered. In October, you all should receive, assuming you're all registered to vote in the District of Columbia, should receive and will receive a mail-in ballot with plenty of time to return it in time to be counted for the November 3rd general election. District of Columbia is hoping to be a leader in this effort nationally so that other states can say, okay, that's actually really not that complicated to do. And mail-in ballots are something that we have always had, just not at this large of a scale. And so I have full faith and confidence in the Board of Elections that they will be able to implement this responsibly and quickly. If for some reason you do not receive it, you are worried about timing, some other circumstance happens, there will be early voting for over a week before Election Day at a minimum 80 voting locations throughout the city. We are still identifying additional Ward 2 locations, which we'll be sharing far and wide.
I missed that.
Oops. All right, serious enough. And so that dual approach gives me comfort that as many people's votes will be cast as possible in the district. Does that answer your question?
Can I ask
Yeah.
you a question? I'm going to take host prerogative. Will there be senior hours in the in-person voting?
Yes, so we are working hard on this. The chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Charles Allen, understands this is really important as well, and he has been a leader in advocating for this with the Board of Elections, and we will continue to ask and respectfully mandate that the Board of Elections do so. We know this is really important. I think one of the challenges comes on Election Day itself with making as many hours accessible to the public. And so if you'd like to vote in person, I would highly recommend you do so through early voting. With the primaries, I went many days, there were 0 people in line. And so would highly recommend you do so in early voting, but we will continue to advocate for senior hours, particularly during those early voting days. And we'll be in contact with you, Lynn, if we are successful in those efforts.
Great, thank you. Are there any other questions? Ed, I see Ed Levy has a question. Please unmute.
Okay. Ed Levy, I live in Burleaf. And I am a user of the Ellington Field. I just want to second what Gail said. The two issues are intensity of outside use and availability of the field to the local community. I personally use the track, which is a great facility. I was really glad to hear you say that the community would have an opportunity for input after DPR comes up with a plan. The problem with some DC agencies in the past is that their notion of community input is that they will tell the community what they've decided to do at a meeting, which is not really input at all. So it was good to hear you just make the point that nothing will be set in concrete until the community has had a chance to address the whatever DPR's proposed plan is. So second, I know a bit about Jelliff. Actually, I'm still a user of the Jelliff facility because I'm part of a group that rents out the facility, plays basketball there, but my kids went there many, many years ago. So the issue with Jelliff is it's not the field, it's the building. The field was renovated, and updated, turned into an artificial field turf field about 10 years ago. But the problem is with the capacity of the building to house the programs and the amount that was made available for renovation, while it would have been sufficient and maybe more than was needed for renovation of the facility as is, it was quite insufficient to either replace the facility or support the kinds of changes that were needed to expand it so that it would meet the needs that exist in the community. So the executive director, have you ever talked to Bob Stowers, Brooke? He's the executive director at Jelliff. He's been there almost since the beginning of time. And he's the person to talk to just get the best information about what's needed there. Now, it's true, he's got his strong opinions about things, but he's also just a fount of knowledge and information about that facility and what's possible and not possible the way it is now with a renovation that would be sufficiently supported by the $7 million and with a kind of substantial change that would enable, for example, a second gym and other changes that would enable the facility to have the kinds of programs that there's demand for. So my third thing is, what committees are you going to try and be on? What's going to be your central area of interest?
Well, thank you very much, Ed. Okay, so in rapid succession, Ellington Field, I'm so glad you brought that up about community input, because it has been something that we continue to be very frustrated by and will not stand for, frankly, is that we see this happen all the time with agencies. They say community input, and yet they already had a plan in place, and that plan remains completely unchanged after they receive community input, and that is not community input. And so that is very important to us, and we are watching with a very close eye as it relates to Ellington Field to ensure that it's just going to be opened up in September, and that is not the time at which the plan is secured. So thank you for flagging that. Jelliff Recreation Center, thank you for that distinction. That's exactly right. The $7 million is going to the Recreation Center to ensure that we can rebuild the space and not just the field. Your last question about committees.
Can I address that for a second? But
sure.
My understanding is that the $7 million would not be sufficient to do the kind of rebuild that would expand the facility so that the programs could be expanded to meet the needs. I mean, they've had to really, that facility at certain times of the year is very intensely used by kids. And the kind of renovation that has been contemplated up to now would not alleviate that problem. You know, I mean, the facility needs all kinds of improvements, even if it, in its current situation and current capacity. But there's really a need for more space there, maybe a second gym. I'm not sure of all the ins and outs of it. That's why I mentioned Bob Stowers as a person to talk to.
Right.
It would be a great source of information. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No. It's an important distinction, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to clarify. I meant to at the outset. So the $7 million that was secured is just a partial promise. We understand that $7 million is not sufficient for the type of renovation that we're looking to do, which is why I was so excited to include in the budget a $200,000 feasibility study that DPR and DGS are responsible for carrying out, and they have to provide to the council by December 2020 what the full estimated cost will be. And so ANC 2E and Kishan Puta and Elizabeth Miller, those Commissioners Puta and Commissioner Miller, have been really strong leaders on this fight and on this effort to ensure that the community is actually included in that estimation. And what considerations are DPR and DGS making to determine the cost? How many families are you really aiming to serve? Because those estimates could really depend on that. And so something that we were very concerned to find out was that a request for proposal was going out soon for a $7 million renovation, which is not what we agreed to. What we agreed to was a $200,000 feasibility study in December. And let's say it came out with a $25 million total cost. Our hope, and I've spoken with the mayor about this as well, is to have that $25 million total amount included in next year's budget, so that next year we can go ahead and start with the renovation. So the $7 million is wholly insufficient. It is essentially a placeholder as a commitment. We didn't want to forego the opportunity to take $7 million now, because who knows what will happen next year, but that is the current plan, is to ensure that we have the full total amount for the full renovation.
And you mentioned the figure, this was to be an approximation of $25 million?
That was just an example. That was just
okay, fine. Okay, you were going to address the committee question.
Oh, yes, committees. I have already been appointed to 4 committees. So I will be on the Transportation and Environment Committee, the Business and Economic Development Committee, the Committee on Facilities and Procurement, and the Committee on the Judiciary and Public Safety. And so I'm very excited to be on those committees. We've done some great work already in my first month on the council, and we are out of session now, but looking forward to a full legislative agenda come September. I know we're about out of time, but I think Betsy, was it Betsy who had your oddball question? I'm now so curious, want to make sure you have your opportunity to ask it.
Was there another question? I thought Betsy asked her question.
I thought she said she had 2 questions. I could be wrong.
Oh, okay. I see one other question here. So if we have a last question, I'm sorry, I don't know your name. I just see a phone number up here.
I thank you. You unmuted me, yes?
I did unmute you, yes.
Thank you so much. I've never had this happen before with a numerical identification. I live in DuPont Circle. And I'm active in the aging in place notion. And one of the wonderful things about where I live is the walkability of my neighborhood, and which I consider under serious threat for much the same reason as was just discussed with respect to the field and DDOT's notion that it knows what's good for us. So I've been very disappointed not to hear you stand up for the neighbors who are concerned about what's going to happen to our vibrant neighborhood Main Street of 17th Street if DDOT continues with certain bicycle advocates to support its conversion into a bike thoroughfare to take commuters downtown and back, because it isn't acceptable to have to go around the block with your bicycle.
Well, thank you very much for raising that. For those who are unfamiliar, this is a proposed bike lane to go through 17th Street. We have been very engaged on this issue and really just making sure that we hear from everybody about their concerns. Something that we are doing, I think it's next week, is having a community meeting with all of the businesses on 14th Street to hear how the new bike lane would affect their businesses. We were very concerned to hear from many neighbors that they felt excluded from the community input process, and like this plan was kind of being forced on them without an opportunity to engage. We also heard from other community members that they've been waiting for this bike lane for 3 years and that they've gone through all the appropriate processes and are frustrated that it's being held up. So the most important thing to us on an issue like this is the process, and to ensure that the process was handled appropriately before we get to the substance of the outcome. I will say,
I'm just going to interrupt for a reason, which is that I have every confidence that process will trump substance, and that unlike what was done west of the circle, no one is questioning providing a protected bike lane. That isn't where it's at. There will be enough process for a fig leaf, and just what your description was about agencies going forward with their preconceived decisions, that is what's going to happen. And the other thing I would like to say is, you know, for the, approaching 40 years that I've owned one and then another condominium, I have had the increase in my property taxes controlled. You know, there's a cap of how very little it can increase each year. There's my homestead exemption, and then there's the $130,000 income I can have before I have to pay more than half of the bill. If we want to, resources are finite, and if we want to address homelessness and affordable housing seriously, I think those are the priorities. So that's just a comment.
No, I really appreciate that, and I agree with you. And we are fighting for that. And I just will add on the bike lane issue. You know, I'm sorry that you haven't heard me speak publicly on the matter. I've been to multiple ANC meetings on it. I've met with dozens of residents and additional neighborhood associations to hear their concerns, to get to the bottom of this, and met with the director of DDOT, met with each of the commissioners. And so we are working on this, and we do not accept that it will just happen because they say so. This is one of our key responsibilities, is oversight. And if at the end of our outreach and understanding of the decisions that have been made, it is evident that the proper process of community input was not followed, we will do everything we can to ensure that it is. And so I guess what I'm saying is we are on top of it, and we are similarly very concerned to hear many of our neighbors share similar concerns that you're sharing tonight.
So I want to thank Brooke very much. I feel that, I promised her we'd be done at 6:30 and we're not. I know that Brooke has other plans this evening. I thank her for being here with us. I thank her for spending the extra time. I also want to add my thanks to thank Carol Kelly and Emily Summers, our program co-chairs, for arranging such a wonderful slot of interesting and varied speakers. I welcome the community to join us again on August 19th for our next talk. And if Brooke is okay with this, I will share email that you can reach Brooke, and feel free to send in any other questions you might have. So Brooke, thank you again. Thank you for the generosity of your time, and thank you for being with us this evening.
Thank you very much, Lynn. And if I may just add one thing that I made a mistake about earlier, we do have our Georgetown representative from our office, Georgetown, Hillendale, Burleigh, Emmanuel Brantley, who is on the call tonight. Emmanuel, you want to say hello and perhaps provide your contact information?
Okay, 1 second. Hi, Emmanuel. Welcome. There you go.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to meet you. As the council member mentioned, my name is Emmanuel Brantley. I've been at the council now for 3 years, serving in various capacities. So I'm excited to offer my insights and experience to help you all solve some of your issues. I took a bunch of notes tonight about some of the issues that you all are having. So I look forward to joining you at the August 19th meeting, if possible, to continue to hear the discussions. My email address is my first initial, E as in Emmanuel, and it's my last name, Brantley, BRANTLEY @dccouncil.us. And I will share my cell phone number with you all. The area code is 404-547-5203. And I'm always here and willing to be a resource for you all. So please don't hesitate to reach out. And as I mentioned, I look forward to joining you all again for the August 19th meeting.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And I just want to mention, by the way, that we do tape these, and this will be available on our YouTube channel. So if anyone needs to go back and get hold of Emmanuel's email or phone number, it's here for perpetuity. We're happy to share it. Thank you all for joining us. This was a really interesting evening or afternoon, I should say. And again, much thanks to Brooke for her availability, for being willing to stay with us so long and answering all our questions. Have a nice evening, and we look forward to seeing you on the 19th and at our other programs.
Thank you, Lynn. Have a good evening.
You too.